Hello and welcome along. So in a recent video I did on the Lost Primarchs, I mentioned the 13th founding, which is one of many foundings of new Space Marine. Now, I said it was also known as the Cursed founding, and that the gene seed using that founding had been reasonably firmly established as being trade to gene seed. So the reason I brought it up was I was speculating that maybe the Lost Primarchs gene seed could have been used in that founding, which could be one of the reasons why records around that founding have been purged from Imperial history. Well, in fact, I was wrong on two counts there. So this is why I'm making this video. So first of all, the 13th founding was actually known as the Dark Founding, not the Cursed founding. That was the 21st founding, and there is reasonable grounds to think that some of those chapters created in the 21st founding were potentially from trade to gene seed. And I might do a separate video on the 21st founding at some point, but I wanted to go over the 13th founding in a little bit more detail in this video and argue that the 13th founding may also have had trade to gene seed used, which is why the Imperium has hidden all records about it. So the 13th founding happened in around the 35th to 36th millennium, which is roughly halfway from the time of the Horus Heresy to the present day in the 40k universe. Now, usually because there's a need for replacement chapters, because quite often in the Imperium it suffers major disasters, either internal or externally caused. And in this case, there was a period of great disruption within the Imperium that weakened it, probably sapped it of some of its military resources, but also led to an attack from some outside force, probably aliens. The Thexian Trade Empire seems to be the most likely option, who were a species of aliens that specialize in manipulating other aliens to do their bidding for them, which is a very common theme within the 40k universe. Hidden enemies that manipulate others to do their bidding for them. Often it's hidden in the background, or sometimes it's outright slavery with like control collars, but there's a lot of very sneaky aliens in the 40k universe, which is why you need to purge the Xeno. Whether or not it was them, doesn't really matter. The point is there was some great military disaster, lots of Space Marines probably died, and in fact it's speculated that several chapters disappeared. So in response to this, the Imperium had to have a new founding, the 13th founding, to raise new chapters to replace those that were lost. So why do I think that this founding used trade to gene seed? Well, one, almost all the records around it are purged. This is a part of 40k lore that this 13th founding is called the Dark Founding because there's almost no information about it. And two, because the chapters that we do know were involved in it, or who are strongly speculated to have been involved in it, have clear signs of being raised from trade to gene seed, even though officially they aren't. So the three chapters that are associated with this founding are the Exorcists, the Death Specters, and the Crimson Sabers. Crimson Sabers are more speculation, but it's believed to be around the right time, and they're probably a decent case for them. The other two, the Exorcist and the Death Specters, are actually officially raised at this time. Because the majority of the records about this founding have been purged, there could well have been many other chapters raised in this founding, and they were just removed from records. Quite plausible that, say, 10 chapters were raised. Who knows? Perhaps the majority of them became traitors, or committed some other sin, were destroyed in military disasters that were shameful to the Imperium, in some other way failed so badly that the Imperium decided just to wipe the records of this whole founding. Now, of course, they didn't do a complete job, because we do know that two chapters were founded then, and there's a strong link with this third chapter, the Crimson Sabers. So the Crimson Sabers did officially fall to chaos. They have fallen to chaos. They exist as a chaos warband. They are followers of Khorne, and they are it's not officially known from whose gene seed they were founded. That is probably part of the information that was removed at the time of the elimination of all this information around the 13th founding. Even the direct connection to the 13th founding would have been removed, but it is still in official Imperial records that the Crimson Sabers exist, unlike whoever else was created at this time. So the Crimson Sabers, why do I think they are a good case for a legion founded using trade to gene stock? Well, they are notorious for being extremely brutal. They fell to Khorne. Their fall to chaos was initiated by instigating a genocidal war. They have all the hallmarks of World Eaters, and I would say that there's a very good chance they were World Eaters. Their one characteristic that makes them seem not like World Eaters is that they were known to be fastidious followers of the Codex Astartes. But I would say that is in many ways another hint, because what often happens with people that have issues with self-control is that they implement a very rigid code of behavior to stop themselves going too far. So if you create a new chapter, having known the history of the World Eaters, and you want to stop them from stepping across the line, you would instigate a system of extreme discipline. If you try to really focus them down a very narrow path where they can't accidentally drift over into indiscipline, and to the point of eventually doing things that you just can't accept. With the most extreme case, of course, is eventually joining chaos. So the World Eaters themselves, back before they were the World Eaters, before they were led by Angron, before they had the Butcher's Nails in them, they still had a big problem in discipline, and they had to have a lot of internal discipline forced on them to stop them from fighting each other or fighting anybody nearby, including their own allies, and going too far and killing civilians all the time. This was something that was a constant problem throughout their early history. And so if this chapter were created from their gene stock, you would want to create a very strong system of controls to stop them going down that same path. So you might argue, well, why create them in the first place? Well, if the Imperium has suffered some great disaster, like it had here, it is short of Space Marine to guard a particular frontier, to take part in a particular campaign, then all of that lovely gene stock that is sitting there somewhere in a vault is very tempting to use. We know that the World Eaters were extremely effective, even if they went too far and eventually obviously fell to chaos. They were effective during the Great Crusade. They were very useful. It was just they were a weapon for a particular task. So if you're the High Lords of Terror and you're thinking, well, how do we deal with this terrible situation? We're overstretched, and someone comes to you with a solution. Was like, well, desperate times need desperate measures. Let's use some of this gene seed. We will be in control of it. We can, it won't go wrong like it did before. We can use this. We've been experimenting. We know it's safe. Don't worry. We'll have this new chapter where you can go out there and there'll be just what we need to smash these aliens. So you can see the Imperium doing this. There are many cases outside of the 13th founding where you could argue that chapters appear to be using traitor gene stock, and so the very fact that the Mechanicum definitely has all of the gene stock from all 20 Primarchs right up to the very present day, and no one's done anything about it. No one said you must remove this. We know that for a fact that it does exist. Well, they're not going to keep it there sitting there unused. So just for the sake of it, although officially they wouldn't use it, I'm certain that they did. And the Inquisition is probably the only organisation that could stop it being used. And if they're involved in the decision to use it, then it would definitely go ahead. So which brings us to the next chapter, which is the Exorcists. Now, the Exorcists are probably the most famous chapter of these three, because I think that they're, I suppose, somewhat of a fan favourite, but also they're one that have been messed around with a lot in the lore. So there's a lot of controversy over how they came into existence, etc. What we do know is they are definitely strongly associated with the Inquisition and are very tightly controlled by them, seemingly created on their request. And they specialise in hunting demons. They are believed to be essentially immune to demon possession, which is believed to come from a method they use where they deliberately possess their Astartes and then remove the demon, which creates a kind of an immunity to demon possession. It also makes them hard to detect by demons. So this is a great idea, isn't it? If you're the Inquisition, having a chapter like this at your beck and call is really useful. So that makes sense. But officially, they're supposed to be Imperial Fist successors, and that just seems a bit weird, because if they were Imperial Fist successors, why is there so much secrecy where their gene stock comes from? It doesn't make any sense. That would be perfectly normal to have an Imperial Fist successor chapter. There's no need to hide it. So there's got to be something they're hiding here. Now, the main theory about why they're hiding it is because it's actually their successors to the Grey Knights. Now, this I think was some old lore, and then it got retconned, and it's hard to tell which is supposed to be true and canon, and which is supposed to be just rumour. Again, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense that they are Grey Knight successors, because what would be the point? Why not just have more Grey Knights? If you're going to use the Grey Knights gene seed to create more Astartes, just increase the size of the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights don't actually need to follow the Codex Astartes anyway, and they can just be as big as they need to be. it seems a bit weird. Also, one of the key characteristics of the Grey Knights is their psychic ability, which the Executioners don't seem to have a particularly high prevalence of psychic, and so it doesn't really seem to add up that well. So what if instead they were a traitor gene stock that is linked to someone, derived from someone, who is known for being able to depossess themselves on their own with no aid? Fulgrim. During the heresy, Fulgrim famously gets possessed by a chaos demon, which eventually leads him to turn into chaos, but he is able to control that demon and force it out of himself, to banish the demon from him, within him, without any outside aid. And we know that the Emperor's Children have good gene stock. We know that they have very good characteristics in pretty much every way. If you want to create a good Astarte, Emperor's Children gene stock is actually a good choice. Now, of course, they ended up being traitors, but there's no reason to suspect that has anything to do with their gene stock at all. So, if you're sitting on that gene stock and you want to create a legion that can be immune to demon possession, perhaps Fulgrim's gene seed is the perfect one to experiment with. Perhaps that's what they did. They secretly experimented, found that his was the most appropriate because they probably had this knowledge passes down through the Inquisition, that Fulgrim had gone through this experience, and then they were like, well, wait, this could be quite useful to us. Perhaps we could create a new chapter that could all do this. That's possible, isn't it? It's just the way the Imperium thinks. They aren't thinking about, oh, this could go wrong. They're thinking about, what if it goes right? And it has gone right, if it's true, obviously. Might not be true. But if it is true, it has gone right, and they were justified in that decision. Now they have a chapter that are perfect for hunting demons. They're also so closely linked to the Inquisition that if anything does go wrong, they're right there to put it right, to purge them. Call the Grey Knights in, purge them. I think there's a good chance that this could be true. Okay, it's purely my idea and complete speculation. If this becomes official Games Workshop law, I want some money. Now, the third legion associated with the 13th founding are the Death Specters. Now, the Death Specters, they're deployed beyond the Imperial frontiers in a kind of a watching brief where they kind of lurk around in the darkness, watching over the frontiers from the outside, and then striking from out of nowhere. But they're particularly ruthless. They have a very strong association with death, and because that's why they're called the Death Specters. Their planet's called Occludus, like hidden. All of their names and ranks and stuff are kind of associated with graves and death. Now, you might think, well, that's obvious then. They are definitely Death Guard. But that's not what I'm going to say. So Death Guard would be too obvious, even for Games Workshop. In the official records, they're down as Raven Guard, which again, that doesn't make sense. Why, if all of the records were purged about the 13th founding, and they are, why do we know that they came from the 13th founding? Is that still in the records? And we still have their gene sire in the record as being Corax, and that doesn't add up. What's more likely is the records were altered so that it looks like at least we know that they're not traitors, because we can see that they are Raven Guard successors, but actually they are Night Lord successors. Why? Well, because Night Lords and Raven Guard share one thing in common. Well, actually, they share a couple of things in common. But one of the most important things physically they share in common is they have a mutation in their gene seed, which means that they have pale skin, very pale skin, and dark hair. This is why both their Primarchs look like the way they do. They both have this very distinct pale skin and dark hair, and they also both have a liking sneaking about in the dark and killing people without warning. So the two legions had quite a lot in common, which makes the Raven Guard a very good substitute when you want to cover up the use of Night Lord gene seed. Now, what do we know about the Death Specters? Well, they have this mission to kind of watch over this frontier in a way that is very similar to the Night Lord's idea of watching over the Imperium and being ready to administer justice on anyone who needs it. And they have a propensity for psychers. They have quite a lot of psychers. And, of course, Conrad Kurz was a psyker, one of the few Primarchs that was an active psyker. Their psychers in particular have a focus around seeing into the future, about predicting future events. And they seem to be able to do this at a very impressive level. So the sort of level that I really only seen in the Thousand Sons. And now I'm not suggesting they're Thousand Sons because they don't have any other connection to the way of the Thousand Sons. There's not really any obvious connection there. But we do know, of course, that Conrad Kurz was able to see the future. That was his great curse. So he could see his own death, and he could see everybody he's met their death. But it also made him incredibly hard to fight, because he could always predict what was going to happen just before it happened and then adjust. A legion that has an obsession with death as a higher level of abilities to predict the future through their psychers, has a character built around being hidden and administering justice and watching in the dark. These are all very strongly linked to the Night Lords. They even have a rank within their forces called the Terrorblade. I mean, if that's not Night Lord lore, I don't know what is. I think that, again, this is a classic example of the Raven Guard being used to cover up where Night Lord Gene Seed is involved. Just because they both have pale skin and dark hair, and they're interested in stabbing people in the dark, it's very easy to switch one for the other. Another reason why the Raven Guard aren't great choices for them for their real gene size is the Raven Guard don't have many successors. They're relatively well known for not having particularly a large number of successors because they've had various issues with gene seed and the size of the legion and various other things that meant that they haven't produced many successors. Again, if you're sitting there, you've got this terrible event that's happened, you desperately need reinforcements, and you've got this Night Lord gene seeding. Well, these guys are actually perfect for this role. You just use them instead, and then you say that they're Raven Guard because, one, you don't want people to know you're using the gene seed of traitors, but two, you don't want the actual chapter itself to know it's come from traitor gene seed, because that would really mess with your mind, wouldn't it? Imagine if you're a loyalist chapter within the 40k universe, the current universe, and everything you know is that the traitors were the most terrible people in the world, and you find out that you're descended from a traitor. I mean, that you couldn't. They wouldn't be able to cope with it. They go mad, and they probably would go and fall to chaos just by being told that they were the descendants of one of the traitor Primarchs. Not to mention, what would all the other military of the Imperium do when they were fighting alongside them? They'd be constantly thinking, "Oh, these guys are going to stab us in the back at any moment." So they would never. It just wouldn't work. So you'd have to obliterate all possible hint that they were created from traitor gene stock. But at the same time, you've got this desperate need for new soldiers, new troops all the time because you're constantly under attack, and everything in the Imperium is very inefficient. So you're just desperate and like, okay, this is a solution for our needs, and we'll just deal with the fallout later. Now we'll do what we usually do. We'll just kill everyone who knows about it. So there you go. 3 legions that are associated with the 13th founding, the Dark Founding, that have very good cases for being created from traitor gene stock. Now, I agree it's perfectly possible that they're not, but I would just like you to consider the fact that we're dealing with the Imperium of Man here, and everything they do is twisted and devious, and usually poorly thought out, resulting in disaster at some point in the future. Just bear this in mind, when the Death Specters go traitor, this is why. Now, of course, there could be plenty of other chapters out there who went traitor from this founding. We just don't know anything about them because they were disappeared, or they just went off into the Eye of Terror or something and changed their name, and that was it, done. And that would also be a good reason why this whole founding was covered up so much. So, what do you think? Do you think these are potential candidates for traitor gene stock? Are there any other chapters that you are pretty convinced are created from traitor gene seed? I would have a few candidates. Won't mention them now, but I'd be interested to hear what you think. And do you even think that the Imperium would allow traitor gene seed to be used if they felt it was, 1, necessary and 2, useful to fill a particular need? Because personally, I think that it's a guarantee that they would. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and share, and I will see you next time.